Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have a conversation with my friend Jeff. Jeff is an admin on the Bridges of Meaning server and also the man behind the Randos United YouTube channel. I had asked him to come on because we had had a conversation about his struggle with sort of church denominations and how to understand which one he should be a part of or how he should participate in the uncovering of those things. And I really wanted to continue that conversation and sort of unpack that and see what he's been learning on this journey of trying different denominations. So Jeff told me privately that this was his first ever podcast that he was asked to be a part of. So I'm super excited that he chose to come on and talk with me, and I could be his first podcast host. And he also shared a lot about his story and, his journey, which I found really beautiful. So if you're not part of Bridges of Meaning or part of a Christian world, denomination, culture, some of the stuff might be a little over your head, but I hope that you still listen because I think Jeff shared a lot of really interesting things. And I think it really taught me a lot about people and how they process things. And it was lovely to just hear more of his background and see how that affected him. But anyways, I hope you enjoy it. It's definitely my longest conversation thus far, but I hope you stick it out. So without further ado, here is Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Cassidy.
Hi. Thanks for coming on and talking with me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for asking.
Of course. So before we get started, why don't you just give a brief introduction for people who don't know you? Just what would you want people to know before we get into the conversation?
Man. Well, I guess what's most appropriate is how we connected, and that's through our interest in Paul Vanderklay and everything that surrounds his channel and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I got sent to Paul Vanderklay by the YouTube algorithm because I had watched some Jordan Peterson stuff, and it linked me up to his conversation with Jordan Peterson from however many years ago now, where Paul got a slot with Jordan Peterson whenever he was doing Patreon, supporter, where you could get time with him. And somebody who was a Patreon supporter, I think, donated his slot to Paul so that Paul could talk to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know all this behind the scenes. I learned this much later. It's just a video or a recommendation popped up on YouTube that says, CRC pastor talks to Jordan Peterson about C.S. Lewis and other things. And I'm just like, oh, wow, this might be interesting. But
yeah, that hit all your boxes, didn't it?
It hit all my boxes. I didn't know who Paul was. I knew who Jordan Peterson was. And when I saw it, I was just like, who is this pastor trying to get in and wiggle his way in and talk to Jordan Peterson? What is this all about? So anyway, fast forward, a Discord server got set up for the people who, are involved or who watch the Paul Vanderklay videos and who have even had conversations on Paul's channel with him. And so I was an early adopter of the Bridges of Meaning server. And I, of course, had seen you talk to Paul before. And I think I even referenced you in one of my later conversations because I was on. There's so much. Sorry, you asked me to tell a little bit about myself.
No, this is great. I think this is all important.
Yeah. So
X-Men origin story.
Paul. Yeah, I started watching Paul's videos a lot more than I was even watching Jordan Peterson's once I got onto Paul. And so I eventually got a slot with Paul. It was about 3 years ago. I talked to him. I was like incredibly nervous and didn't know if I even wanted it to be recorded, didn't know if I wanted it to be published. My wife and I, got a copy of it and we deliberated on it. And I was like, should this go out? Should it not? And we finally decided it was okay. And, I even talked to my kids about it. Like my daughter was still in high school at the time. And I was like, I'm an old internet guy, not knowing anything about the internet. And, I let my daughter watch it and listen to it or whatever. And I was like, so do you think people are going to make a meme out of it? And I'm just going to be a complete joke forever. And she's like, oh, no. She's like, I think this would be really helpful for a lot of people. And so I was like, okay, let's go ahead and do it then. So we have our conversation. I signed up eventually for another to talk to Paul. But as a result of my conversation with Paul, actually some other people who had talked to Paul reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'd talk to you. I'd like to meet up even." And those two people were Luke Thompson. He reached out to Paul immediately because, like, I think at that time, Luke starts watching Paul's videos as soon as they post because he can like incorporate them into the midst of his workday.
Yeah.
And a lot of people can do that. I think I have trouble doing that, but he like emailed Paul immediately, and Paul sent me an email with Luke's email address, and he says the fan mail is pouring in. So anyway, Luke and I connected. We started talking, and in the comments section of Paul's video, where Paul and I had our first conversation, Job spoke up, and Job's from the Netherlands. Job has appeared with Paul multiple times to just talk through his spiritual journey from atheism to now, Christianity. And he reached out and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Texas. We should meet up." And it's funny. It was a joke because he was going to be in Austin. I live in Dallas. That's like a 4-hour drive, and it ended up working out perfectly because I had a week off from work between jobs. And so I just took a day to drive down from Dallas to Austin to pick up Job, and we went to have Texas barbecue. So that was really nice. But that was kind of the first little bubblings up of this community that can spring up from a YouTube channel. And this isn't the first time that's happened. There's tons of YouTubers out there who like even go on the road, and and podcasters and stuff. And they have sessions where people who are fans, get together and that kind of stuff. And I think one of the things that Paul has looked for is, I don't want this to be about me. I want you guys to find each other so that you don't have to rely on me, one person, to be the bottleneck for you to have this community. And so that's actually what started happening. And then, we weren't able to be in the same location most of the time. So we started having our own conversations via Zoom with one another. And we didn't think initially to record them, but then we started to record them and all that kind of stuff. So we got on the Bridges of Meaning server, and that was like, I don't know, when it first started, I guess, I don't know if it's 2 years old now. I can't remember.
Something like that.
A year and a half, 2 years, something like that. I remember the early days when we first got on, it was like all the people that we saw that had talked to Paul were now able to get together and talk to each other. And it was just this amazing thing when it first hit. Yeah. And it probably still is for a lot of people. And it's still an amazing thing to me, but just like that initial, "Oh, wow, you're that person? Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, I watched this and I like this about your story." And then the whole dynamic of Discord allows you then to, it's not just text. No, we can get in a chat room and like actually start conversing together like this.
Right. It was very weird. I remember when I first joined the Discord and like I would start popping into like conversations, people were like, "Are you the Cassidy?" I'm like, "I am not famous at all." Like I just had the like opportunity to like grab a couple slots. And I think because I'm a girl, I'm more like noticeable. But people are like, "Oh, I watched your conversation." I'm like, this is very weird.
Like, but there are women that are interested in this kind of stuff. What?
But no, it was just so fun because like I found Paul through a friend, and I knew Jordan Peterson, but I wasn't like a fan. I still haven't listened to his biblical lectures. I probably should, but
they probably trigger you, but
maybe. But just really loved how like Paul integrated everything. And I was like, I want to talk to him because I didn't even realize he did conversations. And then I found that out. I was like, "Oh, I want to talk to him." So I did. And then after that, I just started listening to all the conversations, like every conversation. And then when the Discord came on, I'm like, well, now I'm having conversations with these people. So it's just so funny. But yeah, I definitely can resonate with that feeling of the Bridges of Meaning. And it's so cool to actually have that come into real life because I've been able to meet several people in person. So yeah,
you got to go to the pre-COVID meetup that was in
Tucson.
Is that in Tucson? Yeah, at the what's the name of the church? I can't remember. I always forget.
Now I'm forgetting. It's
Rod's.
Rod Hugin's church.
Rod Hugin's church. And
Yeah.
Michael C from the Discord goes to that church as well.
Yeah. So I met Michael, I met Job, I met Paul. There was a couple other people from the Discord too that I'm forgetting, but yeah, so it was very fun. I drove 2 hours to like go down there, and it was really fun, and stayed there, and then I was about to leave at 9. So I'm like, I got a long ride, and as I'm walking out, I get stuck in a conversation. I'm there till 11. I'm like,
Right.
like, this is very typical of me. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm hoping to see more in-person meetups sort of bubble up. I know there's one in Arkansas
There's one in Arkansas that's
on the
planned.
11th, but
I'm still debating whether or not I can go. Like I can't get off work to leave early to go to it. And I think it's another 4 or 5 hour drive for me. So I might do it. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I need to talk to my wife a little bit more about it and see if it makes sense. But I really want to go because there are going to be so many people there. There's going to be at least, I know Joey's going to be there. Anyway, this is a lot of inside baseball.
I know.
For people who have no idea what we're talking about. So anyway, I don't know if I've said anything that's about me that you wanted for the intro session, but I mean, if people want to get more into my story, which we could talk about a little bit more too, but that Paul conversation has some bits of it sprinkled in, but we'll talk more about that. But I guess the only other thing that the only other thing that I wanted to say, and this is because it ties back to you, is I mentioned, we were having like Zoom conversations, just talking to each other instead of talking to Paul. And eventually, me and Luke excuse me, we decided, hey, let's record these. And, Luke, Job, and I started doing like a reading of C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed. And I had recently, with no further thought about why or what the plan was or anything like that, I kind of knew somewhere deep down that I wanted to talk to people like you or other people that had talked to Paul. I'm like, oh, there's some people that I want to have conversations with, and maybe I want to have a YouTube channel and do that. But I don't know for sure. I had no idea. This was before Bridges of Meaning had started or anything. And it was just like, I don't know. And so I started it up. I created this YouTube channel. And in your conversation with Paul, your first conversation with Paul, you said, it's just really intriguing to me, or something like this, that you'll just have a conversation with randos from the internet. And so something in my mind that stuck, and I wasn't even like really thinking about it, but it was just there. And I was just like, oh, well, this could be a channel where randos can unite, where randos can come together.
Yeah.
So I created this channel called Randos United, but again, having no real intent or idea of what it would be or what it would become. And so I started Randos United. Job said, hey, let's record our reading of this C.S. Lewis book. And Jeff, go ahead and post it up on Randos United. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that was the first video that ever went up there. And then Job, Luke, and I had a conversation with Paul, and that one went up there too. But anyway, I wanted to bring it around to that, just to say that Cassidy is the person who inspired the name of Randos United. So she needs to get all of the credit for naming that channel.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, I have lots of debates like, oh, Jeff. I'm like, no. It was not Jeff who came up with the name.
Jeff stole that name from Cassidy.
It's okay. I don't need the credit, as long as, I like that it just became a thing. It was so funny because it was just that random thing that I kept like in my head. It was like, I just don't get it. Like, you have these conversations with all of these randos, and I enjoy that it stuck. Well, cool. Well, thanks for that. I think that's really helpful. Yeah. And I'll put links to all like your video, because I do think it was really helpful. I think I actually rewatched your video, like your first one, after I saw the like 4-person conversation on Paul's channel.
Yeah.
So I think I went and like watched it then, but it was really helpful. I found it really interesting. And then links to Randos United too, in case people want to check it out and hear about all of the people we're talking about, because they're all featured.
Right.
Awesome.
It's so fun. It's so fun. Yeah.
Cool. So, I wanted to talk to you today because we had a conversation on Bridges of Meaning the other day, and you were kind of talking about church and denominations and sort of your wrestling with those. So I really wanted to continue having the conversation. So yeah, why don't you kind of talk a little bit about like your struggle and like how you're thinking about those things, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Well, where to start? I I I consider myself a Christian, and I know that has a bunch of different meanings to a bunch of different people. Probably has a bunch of different meanings to me that I don't even, fully realize.
Yeah.
And I've considered myself a Christian ever since I was 4 years old. Because when I was 4 years old, I distinctly remember having, an experience with a presence at the house that I lived in.
Hmm.
And I call that presence, from as best I can understand it, Jesus. Um, I just remember, I remember, uh, I've described this before. I had a conversation with Sarah from the Discord that's posted on Randos United. I think I explained it better there. But anyway, from the time I was 4 years old, I feel like um, Jesus was there. And I actually did do the, evangelical invite Jesus into your heart thing, because that's how I understood it as a 4-year-old, you know. Um, and it was just like, hey, invite me into your heart kind of thing. And I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, come on in. And again, 4 years old, it's really weird that I can remember this, but I do. I just turned 47, so this was a long time ago for me. And so I feel like that presence has always been there. Whenever I was 4, my family attended, I don't even know if you can call it a church. I talked to Paul about this a little bit. It was almost more like a sect of Christianity. They didn't even call themselves church. Like they were very, this is as best I can understand it. This is from a 4-year-old's point of view, and then talking to some of my family who used to be in that, group and aren't a part of it anymore. As best I can understand it, it's a Christian sect, to put it charitably. I wouldn't call it a cult by using, Mary Cohan's definition of cult, which is you're not allowed to leave. You're allowed to leave, but if you leave, you get excommunicated from anybody. Like nobody who's still in it is supposed to be able to like talk to you or associate with you anymore. So that's kind of close to the edge, but not quite. So that was my first experience with quote unquote church. They were very against, like, as best I can understand it, they were kind of against formalized leadership, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like they didn't want like ordained pastors speaking. Like they didn't want to create like this upper class, if that makes sense.
Right. They didn't want a hierarchy.
They didn't want a hierarchy. Their approach was, no, God can work through and in all of us, and it can happen at any moment. And so it's kind of whoever felt led would go up and speak in front of do the sermon, essentially. Now, I don't remember any of this specifically as a kid, but my uncle, who, knew a little bit about it, he told me this. He was like, yeah, so they just have somebody who was no good at public speaking, just kind of go up there and not have anything prepared and just be talking about something. It was just, he was like, yeah, it was just really weird and awkward, and it was just no good. And again, I don't remember any of that, because as a kid, things like that just go over your head.
Yeah.
I do remember they'd have children's time where the kids would like come up, and I know that this happens like in the United Methodist denomination, which, my wife is a part of. And like, so they'll have children's time. And I was like, oh, yeah, we had children's time even in this thing, where they'd go up and, they'd have a little lesson, and we'd go up there and we'd like sing songs. And, you may be familiar with this song or not, Cassidy. It may be too old for you, but we'd sing songs like Deep and Wide. We'd sing songs like, what else? Jesus, yes, Jesus loves me. For the Bible tells me so. They are weak, but he is strong. That kind of stuff. So I remember those songs, things like that were like, this was what was built into me early on. But again, the no structure thing was built into me as well. And a suspicion of institutions was, built into me. And again, this was early, and it wasn't for very long, but I guess those are some formative years. I would presume that we only were attending these kind of things for maybe two, let me back up. But from the time that I was aware that I was in this place, it was probably only happening for about 2 more years before we left. So we broke away from it, and then we started moving into more quote unquote liberal denominations like Southern Baptist and Assemblies of God, Pentecostal, that type of stuff. So those were more of the flavors of churches that I went to as I was growing up in my teens. And then as we reached my teenage years, we would stop going to church. We never, found really a church home, but we remained quote unquote Christian. Like there was at least no overt and really no covert, for that matter, anyone in the family just saying, oh yeah, we're just not a part of the body of Christ anymore. We don't believe in Jesus anymore. We don't, we've become atheist or agnostic. There was nothing like that. Like there was always, there would be sometimes some kind of prayer going on. Like we lived in North Carolina in 1989, and there was a hurricane that came about 300 miles inland, because we lived in Charlotte. And it was pretty powerful. It was like 300-mile winds. And it was just like, that was pretty, at least as far as I understood it, uncommon at the time for a hurricane to be that strong, to come that far inland. But 89 Hurricane Hugo, it came in and, basically wrecked the city. And I remember as we were there in the storm, we were kind of down in the little basement area near the bathroom. And I just remember my mom it's so strange because, this is not a part of evangelicalism, like chants or repetitious prayer. Like I think I've heard there's like the Jesus prayer, dear Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. And you just keep saying that over and over again. And that's not a part of the evangelical culture. They'll point to a specific Bible verse or Jesus says something about that. You don't pray like the pagans or something, And I'm probably steering that completely wrong or interpreting that wrong, but that's just what I remember in like a sermon. So we don't do that, we have conversations. But the reason I bring that up is because whenever, the storm was on us and we were at threat, it was like my mom just went into this repeated prayer, like something like, in the name of Jesus, protect this house, oh Lord, in the name of Jesus, and just over and over and over again, And I just remember, she was like holding us, and we were all there like huddled up as a family together. And I just recall that. So that's just to illustrate that, although we we probably were going again to a church at that time, but even when we weren't going to a church, that whole aura or that whole feeling of who we were and our identity being in Christ, it just never left, even though we weren't at church. So that was my upbringing. I went through a period in my late teens, early 20s, where my parents got divorced. And so that was a big foundational shaker for me. Where I felt like, well, wait a second. I feel like, my entire faith kind of was given to me by my family. And it just feels like this is in complete contradiction to one of the biggest tenets that is a part of, what I feel like we were taught growing up, of how important marriage is, and sexual ethos and morality and that kind of stuff. And it's just like, wow, wait a second. If this is happening in my family, and these things don't really seem to matter or make a difference here, then what is this all about? What have I kind of just been leaning on? And so that was kind of when I started wondering about my own, like trying to see if it was actually my faith or if I was just leaning on the faith of my family. And this is, at a time where I was just like, yeah, there's a clear dichotomy there. It's either mine or it's my family's. There's none of this merging it together kind of thing. And so I think I have some different thoughts on that now that I haven't fully thought out. But so anyway, that was a point in time, late teens, probably more early 20s, where I just started reading the Bible, like just myself. And I didn't get through the whole thing, but there were just some points along the way where I'd hit it. I think I started in the Old Testament and just kept going. And I think I got to, I can't remember where in the Bible it is. I don't know if it's in Chronicles or not, but it's King Solomon. And there's a story where King Solomon asks God, God says, ask anything that you want of me. I think I'm getting the story right. This is the story that I remember reading in my early 20s. And it said, ask anything that you want of me. You can have anything you want. Name it, it's yours. And Solomon asks for wisdom. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Now I may have heard this story in a sermon as well, but I remember distinctly reading that in my bedroom alone in my early 20s, living in a rental house with some roommates. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to pray for the same thing. I'm just going to pray for wisdom. It's debatable whether or not I actually got or how much wisdom I got. But I remember asking for that, and I feel like something happened. I've made a lot of horrible mistakes and made tons of unwise decisions since then. So that's why I ask, I'm not sure how much of that stuck.
Solomon did too. So.
Well, that's true. After that, that's a good point. So anyway, I just mentioned all that to say that I did start reading on my own. I did start, my own quest, I suppose, for my own, where I kind of fell and where my faith was and that kind of stuff. And I started attending a non-denominational evangelical church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, probably in like 1997, 98, because a friend that I worked with invited me to go with him. And they were meeting in like the theater of a high school. A side note, I don't know if anybody remembers this story. They probably don't. It's very esoteric. But there was this kid who made like a homemade clock and brought it to high school as like a science experiment. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes, and the teacher said it was a bomb.
They thought it was a bomb and they suspended him.
Yeah, I do.
This wasn't at the same time, but it was the same high school.
Oh, wow.
That's the high school where this church was meeting at years before that happened, probably about 10 years before that happened.
That's so funny. I was in high school when that happened, so I remember that distinctly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like Clockgate or something like that. I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, that's where this church was meeting. That's where I first started going back to church after being out of church from the time that my parents, from the time that we went to church when I was like maybe a sophomore in high school, and then we stopped going to church. We moved from North Carolina back to Texas because I'm originally from Texas. And so anyway, I meet this friend at work. He invites me to come to church with him. I do. I'm riding with him one morning. He's driving me to his church, and I don't know where I had no idea that they were meeting at a high school. And we're driving towards this high school, and I just kind of joke, and I'm just like, you guys meet at a high school? I'm just making a joke. He's like, well, yeah, actually we do.
It's very non-denom.
I didn't know anything better. I didn't know any better. I'd been out of church probably for like 5 years or something like that. So he takes me in, and I sit down, I listen to the sermon, and I'm just like, oh, well, this guy like doesn't seem like what I would. I'll back up for just a second. I had this whole complex of having trust in like an authority figure or a father figure that you would look up to, and feeling like that trust got broken. And I've talked a little bit about my dad before in some other conversations, but that was really raw for me at that time. And it was somebody, who I at least saw, looking back on it, he was never overtly saying, hey, I'm the standard that you need to live up to of what a Christian is supposed to be. He never he never said that or did that, but that's kind of what I had projected onto him. And when that had fallen apart, I was just like, well, I don't want to go listen to anybody up on stage trying to talk to me about what I need to do to be a Christian. I've known Jesus since I was 4 years old. Ha ha ha. There's nothing that you can tell me, because so anyway, I go and I listen to this guy, and it was just like a completely different experience. It was just like, oh wow, he's not telling us this is how you need to act. He says, these are my issues too. Don't think that I'm telling you things that I don't have problems with. And I was just like, oh wow, I was not expecting to hear that, and so it really stuck with me. They end up moving out of the high school. They become a mega church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I attended there for years, a couple of years. Probably until like maybe 03, 04. So from 98 to 03, 04, just to date it, that's where I was going. And, I'd never been, I came up in this kind of non-structured, hey, we're going to do how we're going to do it kind of church sect. And so through this whole period, I'd never been baptized. And I would even listen to sermons where they talk about, oh yeah, you need to get baptized. It's very important. No, it doesn't mean that you get saved, but it's like an outward whatever and all this kind of stuff. And I remember a lot of times I would bristle at those things, and I would be like, so you mean to tell me that if I never get baptized, I'm not really a Christian? I'm not really doing what Christ wants me to do. This wasn't what anybody was saying to me, but these were the things that were bubbling up in me, from my formation, I suppose, as a child. And so I was always resistant to it. Well, the girl that I was dating at the time, she had been away from church for a long time. And when we first met, I invited her to come to church with me. And so she's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll come. And like, she just completely fell in love with the place and became very immersed in it, and, volunteered to become parts of, volunteered for like their youth ministry, to become a youth leader and all that kind of stuff. And, she decided, well, I can't remember if I was sprinkled in, in her tradition, it's not like immersion baptism where they like dunk you in water. It's more like they sprinkle water on you. Usually it's like infant baptism, that kind of thing. She's like, I can't recall if she told me that she did or not. She said, but I feel like I need to do this. I feel like I need to get baptized. And so, I was very serious. We were very serious in our relationship. And I was like, well, wait a second. If you're going to get baptized, I can't not be baptized. It was just like a really strange, it was like this relational thing where it's just like, it wasn't going to church that convinced me that I needed to get baptized. It was because, wait, I'm in a relationship with a person who's going to be baptized. And and she's like, she feels like it's her giving herself over to Christ and, fully. And I'm just like, well, it doesn't make any sense for her to get baptized and me not to get baptized. So we got baptized together, and I'm like in my mid to late 20s at this point, and it's just like, oh, well, that's strange. How did I? But I didn't have any issues with it at that point, so it was like really weird. I don't know. These are things that I don't understand about myself. So I guess that kind of leads into this conversation because I eventually left that church because there was just something that I heard in one of the sermons where I was just like, you're saying things where you're just too certain that this is the way it is. And there are so many different Christian denominations that see this differently. And I haven't even delved into those denominations, but I know that to me, it would have been better if you would have just said, well, there are several, Christians over the course of history have kind of looked at this in different ways, and our denomination thinks that this is the way it is, but it's not a settled thing, and it's not anything that you need to get hung up on. I'm just teaching you what I and this our non-denominational denomination, who's affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention, by the way, thinks this way about it, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. There's just that part of me that's just like, I'm not going to I'm not going to be a part of this, So there's this thing in me that just doesn't want to join things. Like I'm anti-trendy, and anytime that there's a trend, I'm just like, that's stupid. I don't like it. Like I told Paul about this a little bit. The first time I ever came across Jordan Peterson, I was just like, I don't like him. I think that's dumb. And then I'd start looking into it a little bit more, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I've had that happen multiple times. That happened with me and C.S. Lewis. The first time, everybody's like fawning over C.S. Lewis, and so I look something up online and I start reading like something that he wrote, and I'm just like, this is boring. This is dumb. I don't see what all the hype is about. And so eventually later, it's like relationships that kind of draw me into these things that people are just, the people that I have no relationship with are just saying, this is great. You just need it, or this is the way you need to think about it. This is the way you need to look at it. It's only whenever I have like formed a relationship with someone that I will then start dabbling in that thing again. And so Lewis came back to me like in a small group Bible study where a guy that I really liked who was leading it. And I was just like, oh, this seems like a really humble, nice dude who wants to help with anything. And he's like, yeah, you should probably, this book, Mere Christianity, is pretty good. You should check it out. Well, I didn't look at it, but then whenever I was going through some difficulties in my first marriage, I went back, I met up with this guy because I had mentioned, I'd stopped going to that church because of something that the pastor had said. And I was taking what I thought was a spiritual vacation. I don't know if my Discord alerts are coming over on the audio.
That's okay. I don't know. I've had some too. I'm like, my Discord is blowing up.
And so I met up with him and I said, hey, we're just going through like a really rough time because my wife at the time and I had been attending his small group study together. It was like a newcomers class kind of thing. She was a newcomer. I'm like, I feel like I've been a part of Christianity my whole life, but I'm a newcomer to this tradition, so to speak. So we would start going to that class. And so anyway, he knew the both of us. And when she and I were having trouble, I was like, hey, this was maybe like a year and a half later after I'd stopped going to the church. I said, can we meet up? We start talking. I guess this is what people would classify as maybe my deconstruction phase, although I struggle with the term deconstruction maybe because I know you recently did a podcast about deconstruction, reconstruction, and you had your definitions, and I was working and listening to it on double speed, so I was like multitasking. So I can't remember the definitions that you that you brought in. But to me, I associate deconstruction with a lot of the popular deconstruction stories, which is, I deconstruct and then my faith maybe goes away, or I can't even call it Christian faith anymore. I don't know what to call it. And for me, I never got to that place. I never got to that place, which just like, I feel like I've always been in deconstruction if it's like tearing it down and taking apart. So I meet up with him, and just to tie this back to C.S. Lewis real quick, if there's a thread that you want to follow there, that's fine. But just the reason why I was bringing that up is because I started talking to him about, and I'm really just starting to question some of these doctrines that just seem strange to me. And the biggest sticking point for me was hell at that period, where it's just like, I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. And before anybody's flags start going, I was just like, oh, is Jeff a universalist? I know that triggers some people. I know some people are watching who are in our community are like, say yes, you are. And other people are like, you're not going to say that, are you? And my answer is no. There's a term that Luke Thompson used to use that he doesn't associate with anymore, where he called himself a hopeful universalist. He says, no, I'm not a hopeful universalist anymore. I'm just a universalist. I would say like I'm a hair shy of hopeful universalist. And anyway, there's a place to go there. I'm opening up so many threads and not tying them up. But I would just say that I'm a hopeful universalist for everyone else. And if hell is a place where someone is supposed to go and that they deserve it, I will accept it if it's me, if that makes sense. I don't want it for anyone else. Of course, I don't want it for myself. But if hell is such a place where someone is supposed to go because either they deserve it, which, that's going to trigger a lot of people, If I do anything, or if there's anything that it, like, I can't quite explain it other than using that language. I'm not happy with deserve or whatever, but if I end up in hell, I will accept it as a just place where I was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much I guess I believe in. Um, it sounds really weird as I'm saying it, but in the justice of God, or the rightness of God, or God doing what's best.
Mm.
Um, if what's best for me is hell, then I accept that, I guess. Now, I don't want that for anyone else, which is
Right.
very strange. I don't know if any of that makes sense. That's probably the first time that I've ever said that out loud. But anyway, I'm meeting with this guy and I'm talking to him about hell. And he says to me, there's actually a chapter on hell in one of C.S. Lewis's books. I'd recommend that you go get that book and check it out. And at this point, I'm just like, okay, well, this is something that I want to find out more about. This guy that I admire and trust is recommending it. Let me go check it out. And that book, The Problem of Pain, just completely, I was like, whoa. And I read the chapter on hell and I'm just like, this isn't helping me. Let me just read the rest of the book to see what everything else is about. There's so much stuff in there at the time that was just really, really deep and really impactful to me. So anyway, that's when I meet C.S. Lewis. I have to read everything that I can find at the bookstore that I can get my hands on. I go and grab all these different books. I read Mere Christianity. I read Problem of Pain. I read The Abolition of Man, which I did not understand. I recently listened to the audio version and watched the C.S. Lewis doodle, within the last few years. So oh, okay, I'm starting to get this a little bit more. And so there was a time there where, I wasn't going to church for maybe about 2 or 3 years or something like that. And I started going through what led up to a divorce and decided to try a different tradition. And so I went to a United Methodist church, which was the church that my now ex-wife went to when she was a child. And I was just like, well, let me, there was a part of me that was just like, oh, maybe I can kind of rekindle this, because she actually lost her faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, well, maybe, and we had young kids at the time, well, let me go try this place out. I'm going through a divorce. I don't know how people are going to handle this in the more conservative denominations that I had been attending. Let me try something different. I go there just because I just needed a place maybe where I could feel, I don't know. I guess I have had the hallmarks of what deconstruction was, and I felt like, I need to be in a place where people aren't going to try to steer me out of the questions that I had or the things that I needed answers to, which is very interesting because the guy was a part of that church who gave me the C.S. Lewis book. And he said, I can hear what you're struggling with. I didn't feel any judgment from him or any oh, we need to pray right now. You need to stop thinking about these things. It wasn't anything like that. He was just like, oh, you need to check out C.S. Lewis. That'll help you, I think. And he was right. He was very right. And so anyway, I go to this United Methodist church. I started attending there for a little while. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with all this, but eventually I moved to a different city. So it's just too far to go to that church now. Haven't really found a church. This is post-divorce. It's me, single dadding it, having partial custody. What's it called? Dual custody?
Dual custody.
I can't remember the right word for it. You'd think I would know.
Joint custody?
Joint custody. There you go. So, joint custody. I'm raising kids. My ex doesn't have faith anymore, but she also somewhere in there feels like, I want you to, keep them in church. I think that's something that you need to do, which is really, this was probably before she completely lost her faith, but she just felt like it wasn't something that she could do anymore. And so anyway, we were going to that one church. We moved and I hadn't found a new place. within, I don't know, a month or so of living in the new city, a different coworker at a different job says, "Hey, we live in the same town that you do. We go to this church," and they invite me to that church. So I go to that church. It's what's called the Wesleyan denomination. This was about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. The Wesleyan denomination is kind of like a split from the Methodist denomination. It's based on both of them are, I guess, kind of based on what John Wesley did, which, I am embarrassingly ignorant about John Wesley.
Me too.
um, you know, so anyway, it was an offshoot. What became the United Methodist Church stemmed from, one group of Methodists during the Civil War, and the Wesleyan Church was from another group that split off during the Civil War over slavery. So anyway, this Wesleyan Church is kind of where they fall, like on the theological spectrum, is kind of moderate to conservative leaning. They're not like, I wouldn't call them conservative like giant megachurch, evangelical are, because they have a little bit of the flavor of like Methodism, which is more like what they call a mainline denomination, like Presbyterians, Methodists. I'm forgetting one or two others, but that's
Anglican.
Anglican. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, I get confused sometimes with all of like the different.
Well, in America, it's called Episcopal, the Anglican. Although there are Anglican churches, Esther will say, no, hang on. Those aren't the real, there's Anglicans here in America. Anyway, so I started going to that church. That's the church that I've been in up until COVID. And then, I throughout all this, well, I don't want to get too personal, but I probably already have. I eventually start, swapping between like United Methodist churches, because that's what I was in. And now I've been attending more streaming services for a really long time during COVID. So I'm attending the streaming service of my Wesleyan denomination church that my kids grew up in, streaming online church of United Methodist Church. And then now I'm not streaming Paul's Sunday services, but I am streaming his rough draft to Sunday, because that's all that's available at the time that I have in the morning on Sundays. So I'm like attending quote unquote 3 different church services on Sundays now. But I fast forwarded a little too much. How I've identified myself throughout all this, and especially, since we've all been talking in this little Paul Vanderklay sphere, is I'm a failed done. There are nuns and duns.
Yeah, the non-religious affiliated.
The non-affiliated.
And then the ones who are done, yeah.
And the ones who are done. And so, I don't know. Do you feel like you have a good grasp on what those definitions are? I just want to give them to people who don't know what those things are.
Yeah. So non-religious affiliated are people who don't identify with any sort of religion. So it could be atheist, it could be agnostic, it could be spiritual but not religious, but sort of those things where they don't claim any specific religion. And then a done would be a non-religious affiliated who is through with organized religion completely.
Okay. So I'm probably altering the done definition a little bit for myself, because I've also heard people fall into the done category who say, I still identify as Christian, but I'm done with church. I don't have anything to do with it anymore. I'm not going to be a part of like the institutionalized church. I'm not going to be a part of organized religion.
Right. And those are just my conceptions of what I understand. So that might be part of that, but that's how I always understood it. But I could see that. Yeah. Just people done with church and the organized fashion of what that is.
Right. So I've identified myself as a failed done. It's like I keep trying to quit, but I can't. I just can't quit it. There's so much in me that feels like I want to, but then there's so much of that, that presence that's been in my life since I was 4 years old. That's just like, no, you shouldn't quit. And if somebody were to ask me, well, why not? Why wouldn't you? And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't have a reason. There's not something up here in the rider. There's something in the elephant that's just like, no, we're not going to leave. So let's see, our conversation on the Discord, you're just like, okay, Jeff, when are we going to get to this?
Oh, you're good. I find it all interesting. There's so many, yeah, and you're right. There were so many paths and way to go, but I wanted you to keep going because I feel like this
Yeah,
is helpful to hear
yeah,
you, you know, see how it's all connected. Because I think that's really important about how we think and what we believe. It's not just like these isolated ideas. It's so connected to people
right.
and our stories and our past experiences that
Yeah,
it's helping me get a sense of like the struggle that's happening within this sort of denominational uh,
yeah,
questioning.
yep. So I, hmm, I don't, I struggle with a lot of things, but they're not things that like preclude me from living my life anymore or just feeling like, I have a faith to rest on. Um, there are things that I don't have the answers to, like some of the things that people who are deconstructed and have completely left faith altogether have big problems with and just say, well, I can't reconcile that, so I'm not going to be a part of it. Here's what the right thing is. I figured out what the right thing is, and maybe that's in kind of like more secular ways of looking at the world and looking at morality and that kind of stuff. Like I've never lost that attachment because I always feel like it was it was a relationship with a being, a
Mhm.
presence, a person.
Yeah.
And so that's never left me. And so
Yeah.
that's where my quote unquote foundation is. Now, if that tie ever breaks, yeah, I'll just be out in nowhere land. Who knows what I'll find. But what we were talking about a little bit in our conversation was, I can't even remember what led into it, but I know what it was. I hopped in the middle of a conversation where Shelley was talking because Shelley has moved from evangelicalism into orthodoxy, right?
Mhm.
Shelley from the Discord, who has also had a conversation with Paul.
She's
But
had a
the Discord,
conversation with me.
yes, she has. That's right. She's had a conversation with me too. I've talked to Shelley too. No. um, Shelley was talking about that, and I think she had talked about the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And I've been
Or
having conversations.
you asked her about the Eucharist.
That's right. I asked her about the Eucharist. Oh, yes. I said, oh, Shelley, I have a question for you. Because it was the same question that I asked Luke, who had moved from what's called young, restless, and reformed, but it's a part of evangelicalism, Protestantism, into orthodoxy. And Luke and I were talking about it as he was going through it, it through catechesis. That's a word that if you're from Protestant upbringing like I am, you have no idea what that means. But it's all basically like you're being trained on how to become a member of the church, right? Something like that. Eh,
Yeah. So it's like I get so nervous about talking about orthodoxy because I'm still so new to it. But basically, from what I understand, as a catechumen, you're officially a member of the church, but you're not a full member, so you can't take communion. And there's certain things that you have to do to officially finish the process. But it's that first sort of step to saying, I am genuinely interested in becoming a full member of this church. And it's sort of working with the priest. And they basically just work with you to make sure that you understand what Orthodox believe and that you feel they feel comfortable that you understand the full scope of what it is to be Orthodox. So kind of just giving people like a full understanding of, okay, this is what we believe in our faith. Is this something that you really want to commit to?
right, right. Yeah. So Luke was going through that, and somehow he and I got on the topic of the Eucharist, and he was talking about how he was really looking forward to finally getting to experience that in the Orthodox Church. And so a question just bubbled up in my mind, again, that comes from my background that I've already shared. And that is, and I knew that he had been in evangelical churches, and I know that they do communion, I don't know, once a month, once a quarter. I don't know what it is. And I said, so do you think that you've ever taken communion before in your entire life? And I asked that same question to Shelley, you know, and I can't, it's I'm such a bad listener sometimes, especially when I'm the one asking the question. because I can't now remember exactly what Luke said or what Shelley said. I think Shelley's answer was, I'm not sure. I think that's what she said. And
Yeah.
I think Luke was kind of in that ballpark, but I think he was more in the direction of, honestly, I don't think that I have. And he asked me, or Shelley had more of an answer.
I think Shelley was like, I don't know. I don't think I've experienced to the fullness.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And Luke will correct me. I'm sure he's going to watch this and he'll jump into the comments of what he said. I'm getting it completely wrong, but I'm not getting it completely wrong, but I'm sure I'm getting something wrong. But then he asked me, he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I think that Christ can manifest his presence wherever and whenever he feels like it. And I wasn't trying to be snarky with that. I honestly wasn't. That's my honest opinion. I also, in our conversation on the Discord, I was saying, I have a reverence for the Orthodox tradition. I have a reverence for the Roman Catholic tradition. I have a reverence for the crazy sect. That's not a very reverent thing to say. I have a reverence for the things that were in that Christian sect that I came out of, because just to steer it way back, my grandmother, who was not a Christian and had no faith whatsoever, was approached by someone in that sect to start coming to those services years and years ago, before, I don't know if it was when my mom was a kid or not. Maybe she wasn't even born yet. I can't remember the timeline. But had it not been for her being invited and them going and being a part of that, I would have that. Those are the strands that tie together my, relationship with that presence and my faith.
Yeah.
And so the way I've come to see it is Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, United Methodism, all of the different branches of Christianity, all of Christendom. I don't there's baby in all of it. There's definitely bathwater, but there's baby in all of it too. And so I have a deep reverence for the baby, to use a weird metaphor. Baby Jesus, we'll put it that way. I have a deep reverence for the baby that's in the bath, that's mixed in with the bathwater of the church, and so I have a deep, I think what I was trying to say on the Discord that I didn't say very well, and I'm probably not going to say very well here in our conversation, is I think if you can get to a place where you can find that fullness and be a part of that fullness that is the Eucharist in the Orthodox Church, or is a part of that fullness if that's where you are in Roman Catholicism and the fullness of the Eucharist in that church, I think that that's a good thing. And I think that the more people who are able to do that, who trying to find a word besides submit, but I can't think of one, who submit themselves to that, who put themselves under the knife, so to speak, of that tradition and of that faith, should and could, and it's really good. If I can be one of those people, I want to be, and Father Eric is like, oh, Jeff, I haven't talked to you in forever. Yeah, come back. Let's do some Catholic talks. And, Orthodoxy is probably less, yeah, come on in. It's just like, okay, yeah, there's going to be a lot here that you're going to need to go through and make sure it's really what you want, kind of stuff. That's the way I understand it, at least.
Yeah.
And so sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, Orthodoxy, from my experience and the way that my priests talk about it, they're always like, this is not going to be a hard sell. We are a seeker sensitive, church. The church is always here. Mm-hmm. If you need to go somewhere else and do something, that's fine. We're not going to try to trick you in, but we're here to answer any question you have if you're interested. It's very different from most denominations or churches that I've ever experienced.
Yeah, from what we're used to, for sure.
Yes.
And so what I was saying is I was talking, I messaged with Luke a little bit yesterday and told him I was coming onto your podcast. I was like, hey, guess who's following in your footsteps tomorrow? And he said, ooh, what are you guys going to talk about? You know, do you have anything outlined? And I said, well, we're kind of going to talk about how I'm, to use a Lewis reference, I feel like I'm in the wood between the worlds, which is an allusion to the Chronicles of Narnia, where and Lewis uses another metaphor to better articulate denominations and stuff like that in the introduction to Mere Christianity, where he talks about Christianity as a house. There's a hallway that leads off to all of these different rooms. There's a common hallway that leads off to these different rooms, and these rooms are different denominations. And spend the time in the hallway that you need, asking God which room you need to go into and make your home. I feel like I'm perpetually in that hallway. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Lewis that I have to end up in one of those rooms. If I have to, and that's where God wants me to be, absolutely, that's where I want to go and that's where I want to be. But the wood between the worlds is like a reference from The Magician's Nephew. And just a little backstory for people who know The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but they don't know the whole series. One of my favorite books in that series is The Magician's Nephew, because it's the backstory to how Narnia got created and the first people that ever went to Narnia. And the wood between the worlds is this realm that these magic rings that the protagonist of The Magician's Nephew and the two, well, I guess there's only one protagonist. There's his sidekick friend. I can't even remember her name now. Anyway, Polly.
Polly.
Yes, Polly. He, the protagonist has this uncle who is a magician, and he's not a good guy, but he sneaks in. He and Polly sneak into his study, and they find these rings. And if you touch these rings, they take you to this other place. They take you to this this forest, this wood that has these pools all around, and it's called the Wood Between the Worlds. I think there's a chapter in The Magician's Nephew called the Wood Between the Worlds, and it's basically like this train station or airport, or this transit station where you're in our world. You touch this ring, it takes you here to this spot, and you walk into one of these pools, and it takes you into a different world. And they walk into one of those pools, and it takes them into the world that the White Witch, the world that she actually came from, which is not Narnia, and it's this dead world. And they eventually get out of there, and they make their way into Narnia. I think it's by going back to the Wood Between the Worlds and they're trying to find their way home at that point, and they end up in what is the creation of Narnia. So anyway, that's where I am. I'm in the hallway, and I'm in the Wood Between the Worlds. And what I was talking about in our conversation was, like, is there work for me to be done here in the Wood Between the Worlds, in the hallway? Do I need to go into a room and stay there, or do I need to be one of those one of the creatures that like passes into rooms and goes into other rooms and tries to help the room just become one big room? Or I don't know. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I fall on all of that. If I'm supposed to end up in a room, I feel like I'm in a place where I could never say, yep, this is right, and this is the way that it is. And I feel like that's what you have to be to live in one of those rooms. And I don't know what the sense that I'm getting from Orthodoxy is, well, that's not necessarily the case. Like, you don't have to be that way, but you do have to at least accept the fact that that's what the church is, and the church isn't going to change things to say, oh, well, that was right, but now this is right, and I don't get that sense that that's what will, or that's what is happening or will ever happen with Catholicism or Orthodoxy. I don't get that sense anywhere else in Protestantism. I feel like Protestantism is saying, well, we did look at some of these things this way, but now we look at them differently. And some of the big hot button issues that the Catholic Church and Orthodoxy, like women priests, it's not going to happen. It will never happen in Catholicism. It will never happen in Orthodoxy. I'm not saying I have an opinion one way or the other on that. I'm not saying what should or shouldn't be. I'm just saying, as best I can tell, that is never going to happen in Orthodoxy, and it's never going to happen in Roman Catholicism because of the way that those structures, because of what they are. Like, they wouldn't consider themselves the church anymore if they changed on certain things that they consider the traditional faith that's been handed down to them. So you can say more about that, because that's just the impression that I get.
Yeah, and I don't know as much about Catholicism as I do about Orthodoxy. I know a little bit about Catholicism, enough to know that I don't think that I could be Catholic. Just certain things like the inerrancy of the Pope and the certain things that I know about Catholicism that never sort of settled right with me. But my priest, actually, the bishop who's in my church, he used to be a Catholic priest and converted to Orthodoxy.
Okay.
So he's talked to me a little bit about Catholicism. I'm like, okay, so I don't know the reasoning behind the without women priests in Catholicism, but from what I've heard in Orthodoxy, the liturgy is very symbolic, and so this idea, if the priest is supposed to represent God the Father, that's in the way that they've symbolically interpreted it through the tradition, that was always sort of the male role. And so because of that symbolic you know representation, that's the big sort of reasoning behind the reason women can't be priests. And for some reason, that explanation makes more sense to me than any other. So it's not like other women can't do other things within the Orthodox Church, but
Right.
just that idea of like, men being priests as the symbolic thing. Okay, I can get behind that. I can understand that. And I don't know. I've never been the person who sort of like fussed about women not being able to be priests and like, or pastors. I don't know. Like I've never wanted to be. And I guess there was a part of me that's like, oh, maybe, it kind of sucks for someone who wants to be. But I don't know. I just think the way that it plays out in Orthodoxy and some of these high church traditions are very different than Protestantism. Um, and it's hard to explain without sort of experiencing it. But just from my experience, there's just a different spirit in some of those things that I don't think it becomes as much of a problem
Yeah.
in those traditions.
Yeah, in the sense that I get from Orthodoxy, the reason that I bring all that up is the sense that I get from Orthodoxy, and maybe this is the same way in Roman Catholicism. We have a lot of people on the Discord that can tell us, can educate both of us quite a bit on all of this.
Yeah.
But the sense that I get is, look, this is the way that it is. We're asking you to accept that this is the way that it is, and it's not going to change. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to say, oh, yeah, I can see it, and I 100% agree with it, and this is how I think it should be. But it's also saying there's no use in you trying to change it. Just let that go. Don't worry about it. Become a part of everything that's here and partake in it. But these are things that it's not something that's it's not going to happen. So don't if it's something that you're worried about and it's going to keep you from becoming a part of this, then this might not be right for you right now.
Right. Well, and there's a big sort of spirit in Orthodoxy of trying to be committed to the church and understanding that even if I don't understand it, like it's true conservatism in that it's saying like, and I think Luke has talked about this. I don't know if it was in a conversation that we had recorded or not, but he talked about conservatism being like this idea of like, if you see a fence in a forest, the sort of progressive or non-conservative ideas like just take it down, it doesn't matter, like let's change it, where the conservative viewpoint is more I may not know what this is for, but it's here, and maybe I should keep it for a
Mhm.
reason. And so
Yeah.
that, orthodoxy is very much that, where, the tradition and the liturgy that's been built up through the church, um, they have a respect for that, like, and a reference, like a reverence and a reference to the early church fathers to say, a lot of times they won't say, well, we believe this. It's like, well, this church father wrote about this, and this is why we do it. There's a lot of like, deference to the authority and the tradition that's been passed down. And it's not like certain things haven't changed. There have been things in the Orthodox Church that have changed.
Mhm.
Like catechumen used to be not able to view the whole liturgy. There's a part in the liturgy where it's like, catechumen depart, let all catechumen depart. And in my head, I thought it was like, oh, maybe it's like, move away from catechumen and become an Orthodox member. But in my inquiry class, one of the other guys asked about it, and he was like, well, earlier in the church, catechumen used to leave at that point. They left the church and they would continue to inquiry class, but now they stay. So it's like, it's a very little thing, but it's like, oh, well, that's a change. And that's a huge, like, to me, that's like, oh, well, that seems like pretty big for, for Orthodoxy, and just the,
Right.
the reverence that they have. Um, but it's just a very different, I don't know, it's just a different mindset. And I've been, I've been wrestling with sort of the denominational dilemma too, where
Mm.
it's like you have all of these different denominations, and I grew up Protestant and in a non-denominational place. And so I used to think like, oh, it doesn't really matter. And in in the spaces that I grew up, there was always sort of like a little animosity to Catholicism, where they're
Mhm.
like, they think they have to work for their faith, da 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 da. So there was always, and I don't think I totally bought into that, but there was always sort of that, like, oh, I understood there was this sort of separation. And I think as I went through deconstruction and, spent time outside of a church, I think I got to the point and realized, okay, I do think that church is important. Like, I think I need to be a part of it, because I spent several years being a Christian and purposely not going to church to understand what it meant to be outside of it. And, going through that process, understood I think there's a wisdom and a purpose in God asking us to be a part of a body. And so I I need to start doing that again. And so I did sort of this denominational hopping. Um, I used to always say I was a bit of a denomination whore. I'd like jump and try different things. It's probably so like not appropriate, but anyways, that's what I used to say. And so I tried all of these. I went to a Pentecostal church for a long time, and there was something so weird about this. I think it was an Assembly of God
Mhm.
um, denomination, but there was something so weird about that there, where I was partially drawn in because I had been to, uh, Pentecostal flavor conferences and things, and have had seen, um, had interesting experiences and seen interesting things there that made me sort of like intrigued by it. But there was also a fear, or like a sort of like an uncertainty of like, there seems
Mhm.
something not right. So I purposely put myself in this church to test those assumptions and say, okay, well, what's going on? Like, and trying to, and I learned a lot from that, but just trying to understand it by participating in it. And then I went to a Baptist church pretty regularly for a while, which was really interesting. Definitely broke my categories there as well. Um, and I just tried different things too. Like, I mean, I didn't go to a Mormon church, but I talked to Mormon missionaries. I went to a Seventh-day Adventist Bible study, like all of these things, trying things. And when I came back to the States, I ended up, falling in sort of this non-denominational evangelical church that was targeted at college kids, just to sort of help them, like understand the gospel, make a change on the campus, whatever. And I decided to go there because I thought, well, I went through this deconstruction in college. And if I can help other people who might potentially be going through that, like I want to be a part of that and be able to help people if I can. And, embracing that. And, you know, I think, you know, being more committed to a room, right? Like, so I'd been in the hallway and I'd been like peeking in and going in and out and spending different times in the room, but walking in and say, okay, I'm going to commit to a room. And that church was actually the first time I was ever officially a member of a church. I considered myself a member of the church that I grew up in, or at least like from like middle school on, before I, left home and, stopped going to church every Sunday. But I was never like officially a member. And I thought, well, I participate and I act like it. Why do I need to sign a piece of paper and do that? But I had to be a member to like volunteer at this church. So I was like, okay, I'll become a member. And there was, and I always describe it as like going through the looking glass. It's like I had been a part of this world and it all made sense to me and it was normal, and then I went through this deconstruction and I engaged people outside of my faith and talked about their different faiths and atheism and whatever, and I come back in and now everything's slightly different. There's something like, and there was just sort of this like, I don't know, this irritation that like, and the scratch that I couldn't quite ever lose. But I just kept pushing and being like, that church is not always about what I want it to be. I just going to keep trying to do my best to work on myself, figure out my issues, and operate as honestly as I can within this denomination. And, eventually, if the opportunity comes, be a part of like the body to help work through whatever churches use. But I have to deal with mine first. And as I was doing that, I eventually realized like this process of me committing to this is actually more detrimental to me than I thought. It's affecting me more than I thought. And I'm not going to leave, but I'm going to be open to something else. And I think at that point I was not, because there was a while where I was like, denomination doesn't matter. Denomination, like, and growing from a non-denominational church, it's like, it's the essentials. And there's still a part of me that kind of believes that true. But I think going through deconstruction, I realized it's like, there's all these differences, but we can't all be right. Like there are some of these like doctrinal differences that just can't be consistent together. So like one is probably more right than the other. And I don't think we should get into some like war and like fight or debate about that, but like understanding, okay, like how do we come to truth about those answers? And I never really fully figured that out as a Protestant. But like as I think I stumbled into Orthodoxy on accident. I had talked to Nathan Jacobs and he was the first one to sort of plant seeds. But then after that, I just kept meeting a bunch of Orthodox people, especially on the Discord, and eventually just decided to go. And yeah, just had that experience that was like, which was very weird to me because I'd been a Catholic church and the Mass never connected with me. So I didn't think I would like Orthodoxy, but I was in a more open place where I was like, I don't know anything about Orthodoxy. You hear about Catholicism all the time and Protestantism, but nothing about Orthodoxy. And I think that it just gave me that agnosticism after experiencing the liturgy to go, okay, I'm calling myself a Protestant, but I don't totally know why. I knew I wasn't a Catholic. So I always call it like default Protestantism because I didn't know anything else. I'm like, I know I'm a Christian. I know I have a faith and a trust in Jesus. But where on that line, I don't know. I didn't identify with a certain denomination or school of thought. I was just very open, I thought there was probably one that was right, but I didn't know, and I was open to being convinced. And here comes Orthodoxy. And it really got me thinking because it's like, okay, Protestantism, we're protesters, right? We're like, there's something in us that has that rebellious spirit where we're like, this isn't right. We got to fix it. And so we break off. And, we just continued breaking off like till the end of time. Like we still continue to break off.
I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And
yeah.
You just keep saying that over and over again.
I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to make my own denomination. We're going to do it right. And then later someone else says that. And I don't know. I just started to think like if I was I try to put myself in history. If I was in that time, would I break off from Catholicism? Maybe. Like there were certain things that I just didn't feel right about Catholicism. So should that break have come? Maybe.
Well,
But
back
what,
then it was also, were you willing to get killed over
well, that's true.
it?
Yeah. Which is a whole nother, we have, we have such privilege in the US and
Yeah.
just the Western world in general, where we have the ability to do that. And like the most that's going to happen is like maybe someone's going to shame you on Twitter. You're like, okay.
Right.
Like but like there's a freedom to do that, but the stakes were much higher in some of these other like sort of times. And I think in my head I started to realize like we keep breaking off. Like what if instead of breaking off, we go back to the beginning? We go back to the thing that, has stood the test of time for so long and submit to that. And it's not only like, I think the more that I dig, I'm sure I'm going to have questions, uncertainty, and wrestle with that. But that's totally fine in Orthodoxy. It's not from what my experience, it hasn't been a problem. Um, but I have found that the more that I talk with my priests and get asked the questions and hear their responses, their conception and theologies of the world make way more sense than the Protestantism that I always believed, that at one point made sense to me. And that's why I want to talk to you, because you said something about going to these churches and the feeling like there was something missing.
Mm.
And I had that after I didn't feel like there was something missing in the Protestant churches before Orthodoxy. I thought there was something wrong. There was a spirit or there was a participation in it that wasn't right. I didn't feel like
Mhm.
there was anything missing. Like it felt beautiful and full and good, but there was just something like wrong. But after my first Orthodox service, from then on, any Protestant church service that I went, there felt like there was something missing. And it's not that I couldn't get anything out of services. I did, but it just felt like it wasn't as full. And I think like there's still a part of me that's so concerned about making the wrong choice and making the wrong commitment to a religion, because I don't want to, I want to believe what's true. I want to like follow the right path. And, I don't want to just indoctrinate myself in something, um, and participate in this sort of like, we have the one true church or whatever. um, but I also do recognize that there probably is, if not one that's completely true, which I'm not saying that I'm necessarily in that camp, like everything's perfect. We're humans, we're flawed. But if we're looking at all these different religions and different denominations, in my head, there's probably one that's closest to the truth than the others. And how do I uncover that, or, you know, um, unpack those things? And right now, like orthodoxy feels like it's it, and I don't think I can deny that. Um, but I mean, again, I'm always like, I'm open to be showing something different. And I don't think that God doesn't work in these other places. I don't know if I ever thought that fully, that, oh, God's not in certain things, but I think I loved what you were talking about, how like, you have this reverence for this sort of weird cult, not cult, but cult-ish thing that you were a part of, because it
Yeah.
got you to where you are now. And like, I have that respect where it's like, even though I don't consider myself an evangelical anymore or participate in that, and I think there are certain beliefs that are wrong in that now, I still have an immense respect and love for it. And like, like a beauty in where it got me and how it taught me to love God and getting me to that place to then get me to this new place in orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And like, I don't, like, again, I can't know what my life's going to look like. I never thought I would go through deconstruction, and I never thought I would be in like a high church ritualistic denomination, yet here I am. So like, I can't say I know, but I also love what you said about, that relational aspect of God. And I think that's why I never sort of left the faith either, because I didn't see it as just this belief. I saw it as this relationship. And so
Mhm.
I never let go of that like relationship and trust and that built. And like, yeah, I questioned it sometimes, but there was something in there that was like, there was this moment. And actually, it's so interesting. And now all of these like loose ends that you like put out there, I'm like picking up on them, because you talked about that baptism. And I got baptized when I was 8 because like you couldn't take communion in the church that I was at if you didn't get baptized. And I wanted to drink the grape juice and eat the wafer. And so I got baptized. And I don't think I didn't believe in God, but like I don't think I fully knew what that meant. And then when I was 18, sort of really committed myself to it and like submitted that trust into God and refocus. And so at like 19 or 20, um, I don't know, I just felt this call to get baptized again. I sort of felt like God was asking me to do that and moving me towards that. And so I was sort of like, I don't know, I think it's just a symbol. Like, I don't know if it matters, but I'm just going to do this and, see what it happens. So I ended up getting baptized again. And when I was going through my deconstruction, at sort of like the moments where I was like the most uncertain about God, I always held to that moment when I got baptized and was like, there was something about me at that point that was so believed it so much and was so committed to it that you were willing to stand up in front of all these people and do the symbol of like committing your life to it. Why? And it was just that little piece of hope that I kind of held on to that kept me searching and not willing to just let everything go and like let go of this thing that I thought that was true. And I would let go of it if I could feel confident that I should, but I never got to that place. And I'm grateful for that, but I just couldn't. I always say I couldn't be an atheist if I wanted to be. Because the philosophical reality of what that would mean to me, I can't compute. And I just like I'd have to be nihilistic, and I just don't think that you can actually live like a nihilist. And it's not. And if you could, it'd be a terrible, like
Be a
terrible
short life.
time. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think there is something to that relational aspect, and learning to trust God and where he's leading you and the instincts he gives you, and how to learn to work with both of those things. It's
Mhm.
just wild. But there's so much to your whole story that I resonated with. And I love C.S. Lewis too. I'm such a fangirl. I haven't read as much as you, but yeah, there he that yeah, that sort of perception of the different worlds, and like being in the, what is it, the woods between the worlds.
The wood between the worlds. Yeah.
It does feel like that sometimes when you're really on this open search of like, how do I feel the confidence to commit to something and to claim something, and how do I take this faith and this belief in God and target that to right belief and right practice.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of that made sense.
It does. It does. And I was just thinking that there's something exciting about it too, right? If you take the story, whether you've read the story or not, there was something exciting about when they touched that ring and then they got to this in between place.
Yeah.
There's like this otherworldliness in that space, and then there's also I don't know what's in that room. Let's
Mhm.
go there and check it out. And then the
Yeah.
first one that they did, it was like this. It was this dead world where this
Mhm.
evil villain had destroyed everything, and they're like, let's get out of here, and they leave. And now they're just scrambling trying to get back home, and they don't get home. They get someplace else. They get to Narnia. And like, I'll uh, we're we've been talking for a long time, but there's just one other thing that we did talk about in our discussion that I'll bring up as well. um, the guy who was a youth pastor for my kids, um, has since left that church that we were in for another job, and he's moved into a different denomination, still Protestant evangelical denomination. And they've asked him to plant a church. And we probably haven't been like I was a small group leader in his youth ministry, while my kids were there. And so I haven't been involved in that maybe for like 5 years or something like that. And so he reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, how's it going?" He said, I was praying the other day, and I'm planting this church, and I was praying for names to come to me of people that I should get involved. And he said, and your name came up. And so we ended up I ended up attending like a launch team meeting of this church that he's planting, and just to see what this is all about, see what's going on. And this is a very, I think this ties into everything that we were talking about. And it's why it came up in our discussion, because he kind of put forward what the vision is of the kind of church that he wants to plant, and that the church that he's working in that's sponsoring this plant specifically wanted to use him. He said that in his backstory, he was in seminary, and he was also involved in, like, he's a musical artist. He's a rap artist. And the seminary found out that he was like going out to clubs and honing his craft. And they kicked him out of seminary for it. And he has parlayed his gift into various ministries of like connecting communities, of bringing police and communities together, and just doing all different kinds of things. He got, before he finished seminary, he got hired as a youth pastor at the church that I had attended with my kids for 10 years. And he's just gone on to do all these different things. And the seminary has like taken note. Like he got involved in something in the evangelical world that like brought him to their attention. And the seminary like reached out to him and said, "Look, we've taken a look. We've actually realized the error in our ways of what we did." These weren't his words. This is my interpretation of it. You've done so much, for the body of Christ, etc., in your ministry and what you've done. We want to give you your honorary degree from our seminary. And so, graciously he accepted it. But he just used that to kind of tell the story of, there are ways that God works through people, and I'm an example, who don't necessarily follow the path or the structure of what it is that you're supposed to follow to be able to do it. And he said, and so the kind of church that we want to plant wants to be one where, and this is like kind of on the rugged terrain of the Protestantism place, where it's just like, the things where you were mentioning, Cassidy, that you felt like something was missing. And I know I had talked about that before too. Protestantism, when I was talking to Father Eric during the spiritual exercise that we were going through, our long Lenten fast, whatever, that we were doing together, he said, I have to have, he said something like, Mass for me is actually where everything is. It's all there. Nothing is missing. He's like, what I understand about Protestantism and going to these churches, it just feels like dead. It feels like there would be nothing there. It feels like, for someone who is deep in Catholicism and part of Catholicism, I can absolutely see that. It's like everything's missing. There is nothing here. Where is God even here at all? Now, that's not the critique that was leveled. I don't want to put those words into Father Eric's mouth, but like I could take it even further and actually see it that way. If I put on the goggles of someone who has been formed and who is in Catholicism as deeply as a priest. And so there's part of me where it's just like, I really revere and I really value the things that exist where it feels more full to people who are there, and that's what they're getting more fullness. And so there is that wariness whenever, oh, well, now there's a church being planted where we're not going to need all that structure, but what we're going to be geared towards is like welcoming God's movement in ways that don't require all of these different I'm trying to think of a way to say it where I'm not trying to be like, I was going to say hoops to jump through or boxes to check, but I don't mean that like in a flippant way. I mean it like okay, when you're building a rocket ship to go into space, NASA is not just like, well, we've just got to check this box because you've got to check the box. No, these are some very important things that you have to do to make sure that horrible things don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, I'm just like, I get it. I get we want to be open, as I said before about the Eucharist, where I think Christ can manifest his presence wherever he decides to do it. I'm attracted to that. And at the same time, I also have that conservative bent in me where it's just like, whoa, we've got to have these, we can't take down these fences either. It's Chesterton's fence, I think is what that is. I think G.K. Chesterton came up with that illustration.
Yeah. I didn't think Luke came up with it.
Luke Thompson's fence.
Yeah.
So, I have all these tensions in me where it's just like, oh, I've used the illustration before where I said, my roots are planted on the conservative side of the fence, but the tree like grows over and all of the leaves like, spread over onto a more open or left-leaning side of the fence. So it's just like, I'm in this very difficult spot where I always have a hard time where I start to feel comfortable moving in one direction. Then I have, the Jonathan Haidt rider elephant pulls me over here. And it's just like, whoa, let's be careful. It's like that thing where you're like, you were talking about Pentecostalism, where it's just like, whoa, there's this thing that I'm kind of worried or fearful of or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. You talk about Father Eric saying, he felt like Protestantism, there was something dead to it. And like, I think when I went to the Catholic Church, because I think I've only been to one mass, my brother-in-law, he goes to Protestant church with my sister, but he identifies as Catholic. He grew up Catholic, and there's something, he always just sort of, loved Catholicism and still sort of identifies as Catholic. But I went with him and my sister once, and there was something about it that I was like, it didn't feel dead to me. Like, it wasn't like, oh, nothing's going on here. But to me, it just wasn't, it just felt too structured and too like, it's like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm going through the motions. There was something about that free flowing, like Protestantism that I was like, like you feel like there's a life. And to me, there does feel like there's life. And there's an interesting, I feel like there's some interesting connection with sort of this Pentecostalism and Orthodoxy that I've seen like through people within, the Discord, but, like Frederica Matthew Green had talked about a little bit in a conversation. She was talking about the Jesus prayer. But yeah, there's this sort of like weird connection there where it was like, there is this like spirit and this life within some of those traditions, yet it's almost this chaotic, like uncontrollable, like passion and burning that I think there's like almost a danger to it where it's like, it leads you to, play in this world where it's like, hey, there is something sacred about it. And I think Sarah did in a conversation she did, on the Discord where she was talking about like, it was almost like Orthodoxy was that fireplace to put all of that like burning passion. And I think for me, it's like they're going to Orthodoxy. It's like, there's something there's something controlled and simple about it. And like, it's very different from Protestantism where it's like the only participation you really have in Protestantism is the worship. You're singing and you're worshiping and you're participating, but then, you sit down and someone speaks to you and they teach us to you. Whereas the whole sort of liturgy of, a Catholic or Orthodox service is a participation where, you may just be standing there, but like the whole the whole scene of what's going on, like you're participating in it, and it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it was this place where this spirit that is alive within these traditions, but it's sort of running wild and rampant and just continually creating chaos, had like the structure in this place to like contain that and like
Mm-hmm.
be more honest with like the uncertainty and the mystery of what this is, because there's so much about the Western tradition, especially in Protestantism, that is influenced by modernity and materialism, that like we lose sight of the fact that Christianity is this mystical religion. And
Yeah.
like I'm uncomfortable with mystery and I'm still working on that and being able to embrace it. But Orthodoxy has helped me to embrace the mystery more than other traditions that I've seen before.
Mhm.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, there's so much in the tradition that I came up in that had me so focused on, I guess, the exactly what you're talking about right there, the materialist way of looking at it. It's almost like the time where I came up in the Protestant church, the whole culture and everything that had built up to that point in history over time, particularly in America, it's almost as if the church had said, the Protestant church had said, oh yeah, I've mentioned this before, Brett Weinstein has said, well, it's pretty obvious that we're living in base reality. And I think what he means by that is like material reality, right? And it's almost like the church had conceded that, had basically accepted the rules of modernity, and it just said, well, this is all that there is. This is the only way to know truth, because it's the only way that we can, scientific method verify it over and over and over and over again. And so if we can verify it over and over and over again, it just means it's true, right?
Yeah.
And you can take back that philosophical assumption. Well, wait a second. There's a built-in assumption there that because you can repeat something, it means it's true.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, I'm not a philosopher. I don't, but I do get that to a certain extent. But that can also drive you into places of just like, well, then how can you know that anything is true? And then that's when you do
Yeah.
get into philosophical questions.
Right. Well, and it's this weird like dance where it's like we don't believe that the material world is all there is, yet we act as if a little bit that that's all there is. And like I understand that sort of like dichotomy, and especially when it's like there are plenty of people who claim miracles who are, you know, I, I doubt that there are really miracles. It's not to say that everything that happens, yet there's this like this weird skepticism and this weird dance. And you get
Mhm.
you get sort of these Protestant mysticism, like mysticists that kind of are too wooey and sort of like feel like you're you're almost like running on just feelings as opposed to
Mhm.
something grounded. Yet then you get this other side where it's like just like all these like arguments and this apologetic like framework of like, the knockdown argument of
All
Christianity.
logic and facts.
It's like there's like got to be a middle point somewhere. Like both of these extremes um don't seem to be profitable to me, just the way that I see them intellectually, but then the way that I see them embodied in people. They just
Mhm.
don't seem to make sense. And um so far to me it feels like my embrace of orthodoxy and my exploration of that has gotten me closest to this middle ground than anything else.
You reminded me with that. I had a very I I had a very I think wise critique leveled at me within the last year, and that was that I hold balance as an idol.
Mm,
And really had to think about that, because initially I didn't like it. I'm like, no, everything needs to be balanced. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, maybe that probably is true.
mm,
Um, and the more I've thought about it, and the more I've talked about it with Luke a little bit, not necessarily that critique was leveled against me, but even when we were talking about something completely different, and I said, well, I think it needs to be balanced. And And then I had to think about that critique that was leveled against me of whatever Luke and I were talking about. I brought that critique in and I started thinking, you know what? It doesn't necessarily have to be balanced. I think about a verse in the Old Testament where it says, the Birds in the 60s made a song about it, a time to everything turn, I think is the name of the song, but a time to everything under heaven. And things don't necessarily have to be balanced all the time. Sometimes the extreme is the right thing in the right moment. But
Right.
this is what I wrestle with because I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
That's where I have to lean on this presence that has come into my life to say, you know what, you tell me when it's time to apply this particular reaction or response or pro action. Lewis in Mere Christianity talks about how the moral law is basically tells us which notes to play. Like if notes are different impulses that we have, like oh, you need to eat, or oh, you need to be kind, or oh, you need to encourage your sexual impulse with your wife or with your husband. There's a right and a wrong time to play those notes. And sometimes they need to. I'm riffing off of it now. Sometimes you have to play those notes really hard, and sometimes you have to, play the kindness note really hard, or sometimes you have to play the hard truth note really hard. Now that's the one that I have difficulty with because I'm a very agreeable person, and I also like to get along with people as much as I can.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me to find when it is the right time to say, I actually need to confront this person, or I need to, to use biblical language, it's time for righteous rebuke. I don't ever think it's a time for that, but I also know that that's not true if I read the gospel accounts of Jesus with his own disciples.
Yeah.
And so all that I would say there is, that critique level against me, I think was right. If I think it just always needs to be balanced, then I am not following that presence anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if I would say that I am like a person that's always seeking balance. I think I'm more an addict to extremes. I throw myself into things fully, and I don't think that I'm like an extremist. But there is something to me that like understands that I don't know, it's just I was talking to somebody about it, about like what it means to be moderate. And I think we were talking it in the realm of politics, where it's like, I don't think that when someone says they're moderate, it's always that, oh, it's finding a happy middle. But like, because there's going to be different things. Well, maybe you're more extreme on this side here, but there's another position that you hold that's more extreme on here. And it doesn't fit quite in the idealized picture of what it means to be on either extreme. I feel like I always call myself a walking contradiction because I find myself in there where like I want the black and white, yet I understand and I believe that there is a world that lives in black and white and truth and falsities, yet there's another part of me that understands this is all complicated and gray, and
Right.
like how do we manage that and do our best to stand for our own black and whites while being open to the idea that our black and white might not be quite as like confident as we think. And like, yeah, I do think that there is this level in which where sometimes a moral action is right in one situation that wouldn't be the same in other. And like, that idea of kindness is not just like saying nice words and doing things. Sometimes the kindest thing for you to do is tell someone like, stop it, you're being an idiot. Like,
Right.
And so there's this level in which that I feel like it, especially in Protestantism, like that's sort of that idea of like, how do we love people? We be nice and we, get along, and, we don't talk about these things. And, sometimes that's the right move, but there's other times where it's like, maybe there is something to holding to, something deeper and being committed to not just sitting on a fence. And like,
Yeah.
I definitely think the last couple of years I've had to balance that, where it's like not being so sold out to the thing that I'm in to not question where I'm at and how I'm participating in it, but not be so wishy-washy that I have nothing to ground my life in.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
I don't think you can live in either of those extremes. And so you have
Right.
to find some weird balance that adopts extremes.
Right.
It's a paradox.
Something that incorporates it all. When you
Yeah.
were talking about moderation before too, this thought came to mind of, what I learned during my that little spiritual exercise that I went through over the 3-month period was, ascetic practices and not taking part in things, not because they're wrong in and of themselves, but to train yourself not to actually become beholden to them.
Mm,
So there were different practices like not watching TV, no eating between meals, no nothing, nothing, no sweets, no soft drinks, all this kind of stuff. Where from a Protestant background, you could look at it, and certain strands of evangelicalism would be like, well, "That's legalism. We're not about that."
yeah.
It's like, well, that's not what I was learning that it was for. I was ultimately learning that it was like for training, so that you're not locked into them. Andrea with the Bangs had a good conversation with oh, I'm forgetting the guy's name now. It's the one that Paul did commentary on. But
Richard
anyway, he's like
Rowland?
Richard Rowland, that's him. And he was talking about, eating and gluttony and that kind of stuff. And it's just like, in the medieval frame, or the discarded image, the C.S. Lewis book they're talking about that I still haven't read, apparently really need to, um, where he talked about how, well, you don't want to eat too much because, in our frame, in the modern frame, you say you would become unhealthy and you get diabetes and you become overweight, and, all kinds of health
Mm,
problems would come into play. And, while all that may be true for most people, what they would say back in the medieval period is it would deaden your ability to hear and to experience God.
mm,
That's kind of the gist of how he said it. And you're just like, ooh, and when it comes to moderation, it's ascetic practices, which I learned the word ascetic comes from a Greek word that just means train,
mm,
is to train yourself not to fall into being responding to all of these different things in the world as an animal would. If you just keep
mm,
putting food in front of a dog, it's just going to keep eating it.
mm,
And if you put various things that are in front of us to choose, you know, if we were just an animal and if we didn't have the spirit of God in us, to use the the breath of God in us, to use the Genesis illustration, then that's kind of what separates us from the animals. And
mm,
so you're trying to keep from having those things control you. But also,
mm,
when it comes to food, the reason that I tied this to moderation is because as I was going through that experience, I was like, oh, I could eat this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to step away from it because I'm actually leaving it for someone else. Or there might be a different period in time where I need this way more than I need it right now. And so the moderating factor is, it's not that I don't think, let's say that I'm on the left leaning side of a temperament. If I were, I could say, um, oh, I'm having a hard time doing it this way. I'm having a hard time looking at it from a
the other
different
side, yeah.
perspective. But I guess I could say, oh gosh, I can't think of a good example. So I'll just do it.
Oh, I think I lost you for a
Or
second.
leaning over. Um, oh, sorry.
I think we're back.
So, okay, if we're back, I was just going to say, to be moderate about something is not to say that, oh my gosh, I don't think that all of these things, that many of these things that are being brought up in social justice movements are not important and not deeply important. Um, but there might be a, how to say this, there might be a time where I need to save all of my energy. I need to moderate so that, yes, this does need to be done, but there's going to be a better time where it's going to achieve more for what really is important and needs to be achieved to actually execute on it, and maybe execute on it in a different way. So you know what, I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to do this thing that, so many people are saying, oh, you need to be involved in this. Do you not think that this is important, or that this is, serious? And it's just like, at the core of what you're talking about, yes, I do. I'm going to hold back, though, because I don't think this is either the right time or the right forum or the right way to go about actually achieving what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Right.
And there's probably a good example of somebody who's on the left-leaning side of the spectrum that could say that about, I'll go way into a hot button issue here. Let's say that there's somebody who thinks that abortion needs to be legal. They could say, well, do you not agree that this is actually a human life, that this is a real person? I probably do, but I don't think that we need to enact this particular law that this particular state just passed, or this one right here. I think there are better ways to go about preserving unborn life, so I'm going to moderate where I'm going to moderate on those things, those core things that you're saying on the other side of the fence that I, agree with. But I'm not going to go to the place where you want me to go to try to achieve the thing that we both want to achieve.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's all very interesting. Man, I feel like if we keep going, we're going to be here for another hour.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll probably wrap it up. But this was really great. I really enjoyed it, and we'll have to keep the conversation going, because there's a lot more that I think still needs to be unpacked. But thank you for unpacking it here.
Yeah, it was good. Thanks for having me. We'll have to have you on Randos United again someday.
Oh, yeah. Sounds good. Thank you so much for watching. I've tried to collect as many of the links as we talked about down below, so feel free to check that out. But with that, I will close with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.